G'day, I'm Owen. You've joined the pub test, and in this week's edition, we are continuing our Jack the Ripper suspect series, and we're looking at Sir Walter Sickert. So, who was he, and how does he fit into the Jack the Ripper saga? Well, Walter had Danish father and an English mother, and he was born in 1860. They were living in Germany because his father, Oswald, he was an artist and he had a job over there, but then at 8 years of age, they moved to England. Now at 18, Walter drops out of school because he couldn't afford the university, and he wanted to do art because he'd drawn all his life. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, but his father said that's probably not the best idea, son, because maybe they didn't have enough ching, so there's got to be another option for you. So he actually went into theatre and started being an actor. But then, interestingly, he, a couple of years into that, met Whistler, as in the famous artist, and I only really have ever heard of the Whistler's mother painting because of the Mr. Bean movie. I know that's really, really sad, but I am not into art. But I actually find it interesting that Whistler helped Sickert with his painting. He showed him how to do this real quick type of stuff where you could see a music hall and you could just smash it out while everyone's there and your painting's done. And so Walter learnt this technique. But it's of note that it was Walter Sickert that took the Whistler's mother painting over to France. So he was obviously good friends with Whistler, and he was going to meet up with a couple of famous French artists as well when this painting was going to be displayed. One of them didn't show up, but Edgar Degas did. And Sickert and Degas formed a friendship for the rest of their lives. And Degas was the one that actually mentored Walter a little bit more and showed him a different way of painting and suggested that he try, instead of just trying to smash out the artwork in one big hit, just do a quick sketch or a drawing, maybe get a photograph, and then go back to your studio and paint it out. And that suited Walter way more than the way Whistler had shown him to do things. And so that was the style that he then continued, while still mixing this other sort of quick smash around with your paintbrush as well. And that's why he got a very distinctive sort of style about him, Walter did. But in 1885, he marries Ellen Cobden. Now, she was 12 years older than him. That doesn't seem to be a huge issue. It allowed him a bit more security, though, because she had some money. And that helps when you're a creative person, let me tell you, because you can focus on your work rather than trying to make the cash. And it would be fair to say that due to her affluence, it allowed him to set up a proper studio and just really focus down on his art. But it's important to note that in 1896 they had separated, mainly because Walter was finding company elsewhere. But it is also important to note that Walter really loved France. So he travelled to France often. He ended up, after 1896, moving in with a lady who had a few children, and it suggested that one of those children could have been his as well. But he lives over there for a few years before he returns back to England around 1905. But also, and this is important to note as we go through this, that he could speak French very fluently. And it has been stated that, yes, France was his spiritual home, for want of a better term. And coming from a multicultural background, it's easy to see why he could make those connections to the culture that he really enjoyed. But in 1905, he's back full-time in England, and he's living in Camden. And then a woman of the night got murdered there, and he did some very famous paintings of the Camden Town murder. that is also of interest to note. During his time in Camden, he started teaching, and he met a young student who he ends up marrying. But she passes away in 1920, and a strange thing happened at the funeral. It said that he's gone and picked up some of the ashes and thrown them at a few of the mourners that were there. Very odd behaviour. But then in 1926, he marries a long-time friend, Therese, and his health, though, deteriorates rather rapidly. And so he's mostly confined to his studio now, painting from photographs. And we will get into the way he painted, because that is important to this Ripper saga. But it said that his health declined. He was honoured with a particular art show in 1941, where it was a one-man exhibition of all his paintings. And then in 1942, Sir Walter passed away. So how does he fit in to the Jack the Ripper saga? Well, he's mostly made famous by Patricia Cromwell, who wrote the book Jack the Ripper Case Closed, I think it's titled, where she says that this is the bloke. Sir Walter is the one. Yet, in all fairness, she wasn't the first person to raise the question mark on Sir Walter. Someone did in 1970 and someone did in the early 1990s. So there were at least 3 books written on this bloke as a candidate for Jack the Ripper. The important thing, though, with Patricia Cromwell's book is that she said she got the DNA off the Dear Boss letter. And that proved, with all this other evidence that we will look at, that he was Jack the Ripper. Also, some of his paintings, like the Camden Town murder, it wasn't just the only crime painting that he did. He also painted a picture of Mary Kelly and also Catherine Eddowes, after they'd obviously passed away. So like the crime scene photo, we might say, is he's painted it. Now, what is of note here, and it is very important, Sir Walter only painted things he had either seen or had a photograph of. He didn't paint from his imagination. So the only way he could have painted those 2 women, the 2 Ripper victims, is if he had seen them himself. And it is asserted there is no way he could have seen a photo of those crime scenes. Therefore, when you put that all together, well, you're making a strong case. And it is important to note that, yes, he did have an interest in the Jack the Ripper situation. But what is of note as well, he did start the royal conspiracy. Yes, he did tell us a story of Prince Albert having a relationship with this woman, Annie, and they have a child, a daughter together. Now, a lot of the other embellishments in the royal conspiracy, as shown in the Prince Albert video on this channel, not verified that he said any of those things, because that really starts getting quite elaborate. But yes, he did talk about this royal conspiracy. Not necessarily that Prince Albert, though, was Jack the Ripper, just putting that out there. But I'd just say he probably kick-started it along a little bit. So it's looking rather strong case against him. And particularly when some people say, well, Edgar Degas could have been involved in some of this as well. So we can go about a little bit conspiracy theory down that path as too, that the mentor and the student maybe worked together performing these crimes. That's not stated, though, in any of these books, but it's a recent sort of notion that's come to light. And there's that video on Edgar Degas also on this channel if you want to check out that as well. But there are some dissenting viewpoints to this evidence. Firstly, there is a lot of conjecture about the Dear Boss letter. to start with, was it written by Jack the Ripper? Most people today would say definitely not. So let's just take that for what it is. So I won't break down the DNA evidence and get into that. But if we accept the fact that Jack the Ripper didn't write the Dear Boss letter, who really doesn't matter who wrote it? Did Walter Sickert send it in as sort of a bit of a laugh? Well, let's just say for the sake of argument that he did. Now, I don't believe that he did, just quietly, but just say that he did. What difference would it make? Because it's highly unlikely that the Dear Boss letter was written by the actual perpetrator of the crime. In fact, as has been stated in many comments on this channel, it was a media person that wrote that letter so that they could coin the term Jack the Ripper. And then they could really run some headlines. So as I said, I won't break down the DNA evidence on it. I'll just stop there. Otherwise, I'll start going on a massive tangent. But there is another very fascinating thing about the paintings. Now, Patricia Cromwell particularly has said in interviews there is no way Walter Sickert could have seen those crime scenes without being there himself. Well, let me tell you, there could be a very plausible and reasonable explanation as to why he painted Mary Kelly and Catherine Eddowes. Here's a very, very fascinating detail. In 1897, a person was arrested in France for assaulting a woman. It later turns out he became known as the French Ripper. He had killed about 7 women and 5 children, and he was executed. Then someone by the name I can't pronounce because it's French wrote a book titled that I can't also pronounce because it's French. But in it, he put a little snapshot of Jack the Ripper as well. And so he's written this book about this bloke who's the French Ripper and just put a little bit of a note. Maybe the similarities between the Whitechapel crimes and what this bloke did in France. And in the book, there were 2 photos of the Mary Kelly crime scene and the Catherine Eddowes crime scene. Knowing that Sir Walter was living in France at the time when this book was released, was fluent in French, was definitely interested in the Ripper crimes, that is well known, what do you think the chances are that he saw that book? What's the chances he had that book, but definitely could have seen those photos? See, it's interesting that it's stated that he definitely never saw them. Now, I'm not saying he ever did exactly, but I'm saying there's a high possibility that he did, because it's also of interest that the only 2 photos in that book were of Mary Kelly and Catherine Eddowes. And Walter Sickert is never described as ever painting any of the other 3 victims. You won't see one of Polly Nichols, of Elizabeth Stride, or Annie Chapman. So, where did he get the inspiration? And particularly the painting of Catherine Eddowes was more the morgue picture that was shown in the book, not the actual crime scene itself. And so I do question the DNA on the letter. I don't think it really matters. And the fact that he only painted 2 of the victims that he would have had access to those photographs. So that is a bit to think about. But what do you believe? Was Sir Walter Sickert Jack the Ripper? Let us know down there in comments. Now, as I've stated, we are now only 2 videos away. So I've got 1 more suspect to go. And then I will be stating what I think. But just reaffirming, this will not end the series. When I release what I think is the theory, and I have been dropping hints, almost gave it away in this one, just mind you. But the series will continue because there are a lot more suspects to go, but it is time for me to state what I believe. And as I've always said, there's nothing wrong with having a strong opinion. You need a strong opinion. It's just if you believe that your opinion is the only right one, that's when we start getting into trouble, because there is a lot of evidence still to consider as we go through this. But thank you very much for watching. It genuinely is appreciated. I'm Owen. You've been watching The Pub Test, and we will see you on the next one.